Hey guys! So today Eve and I are going to talk about reason. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, if you are a tech lead, how can you be the voice of reason for your software engineering team? Well, I usually say that a good tech lead should have a few things that they, like a few areas that where they should be the most engaged, the person who's trying the hardest to make sure that these sorts of things are happening, right? And that is the responsibility of any good leader, I would say. And one of the first things is that you should be a voice for product quality, that things are working well and that things are bug free and like good practices are being followed, things like that. But you should also be the pragmatic type, which basically means that you need to have a bit of a balance between technical innovation and business mindset, because you should understand that the goal of the software team is to produce a system that is well working but meets budget restraints, feature specification restraints, or things like that. You can't just be all on the team side. You have to be a little bit of a, how do I put it, like a diplomat. You have to understand that the team is here to deliver on some goals. You need to understand those goals and you need to understand how the business works and so forth, and sort of mediate between the two parties a little bit so that you don't get caught with the sort of things that can happen, which is that you forget that, well, software is not about just having the coolest tools or like these sort of things. Like you start forgetting that like the goal of the system is to produce money or value or something like that. And the other stuff is nice to have, like the tools that you are using, they are a means to that end. But you have to be a bit honest with yourself when a tool actually matters or a practice actually matters and when it doesn't matter. And that is super, super important. The higher up the leadership chain you go, the more important it becomes, if you ask me, at the very least. So what I try to do when I talk to my software engineers or when I try to be the voice of reason is that I know that there is a tendency for a lot of my developers to sometimes some of the, it's not for everybody, of course, like everybody's different, right? But I get to know them well enough that I know roughly where their biases lie. And the most common biases are usually either they're more on the lethargic side where they don't really care about anything, or like there's also a spectrum here, of course, but that's usually one extreme. And the other extreme is that they want to make everything super perfect all the time, and everything is about the latest trends or the newest tools or things like that. You have that span, and then what you need to do is what I try to do, I argue at the very least, and that is to treat them a little bit like a school class or children or something like that. Not in, I mean, they're adults and so forth, but you need to get to know them well enough to know what. So, like, if you have kids of your own, for example, that your kids are very trustworthy and will do well in some situations, and in some situations they're not going to do that. Sometimes they cannot be trusted at all due to that they have you know a weakness or an emotional thing or like some bias, as I was saying. And the software teams work the same way. So I know roughly after a little while that this and this person, they're usually not going to like question any of the story cards or like anything like that. You're just gonna go with whatever happens, right? And these people here, they will question a lot, or like they will try to over-engineer things or things like that. There are these various things, right? And so what I usually do in those sorts of situations is that I try to be the person who can, well, basically just ask them to elaborate a little bit on what their thought process is on something. Because as I can imagine, if I have which is very common, let's say we do a story specification refinement or like a grooming session or something like that, and I know that most of my team, they never ask any questions and so forth and so, but I also know that they usually have questions or like there are misunderstandings later on. What I usually do in those situations is that I know that I have to play the part of the person who asks questions, because I know that they will not. And so what I do is that I start a very simple thing. For example, I ask one of my coworkers, can you tell me a little bit about the story? What is it about? What are we supposed to do when we go through the cards? And if they can't, I'm going to ask them, why don't you know? Like if they're unsure and so forth, because I know for a fact that there's a whole genre of people who go to meetings and they don't listen, like they surf on their phone, or like they just plug out completely. Stand up is the most common one, where people don't even think it, like they're just, especially in remote times now, where nothing said during that session they will retain. And so what do I do? Well, as a quote unquote teacher, or like someone who's a coach or call or whatever, I make sure that you're doing that, because it is going to be important for you to know what the story specification is and what it's about and all of that stuff. So I just make sure I poke you in a very socially nice way. I don't attack people. I don't do anything like I'm not unpleasant in any way. I just ask you, and then we'll see if you were paying attention. And then when you start doing that a little bit over and over, you start seeing that people start paying attention, because it gets a little bit embarrassing, because they're not used to having to like interact and so forth. And if, let's say, oh, we don't really know or so forth, okay, cool, then we'll have to do another grooming session. I'll call in the stakeholders, we'll talk over it all again, because then basically I force them. It's a bit like forcing your kids to clean their, like if they didn't brush their teeth correctly, now we're going to brush our teeth again. And the same thing goes for when I talk to the tech nerds and like the people who are like, because this is more the bias I'm reading into this question, because the voice of reason, in my experience at the very least, the voice of reason is usually most useful when you're dealing with software developers who want to do really drastic technological changes or things like that. But I wanted to give you an example of how you can also not just be the voice of reason, but to be the person who basically bridges the, because that is fundamentally, I argue, more valuable than just being the voice of reason. You have to be the person as a good tech lead that makes sure that your software developers have the things that are necessary to meet the goals. And in some cases, that's just tools or like practices and stuff like that. And sometimes it's personal coaching to know your people well enough to sort of, give them a carrot or give them a stick at the right time, so that it's like a personal trainer. If you see they're slouching off a little bit because they're a little bit too lazy or something like that, you don't attack them, you don't get mean with them, you just ask them, hey, is everything all fine? Like, just make them aware. Usually that is enough for them to sort of pick up their pace, right? And for the voice of reason, and when it comes to tooling, it's very simple. I always ask, okay, so you want to do this and this and so forth, and I ask, how much of a difference is that going to make? Like, have you, like, what difference does it make? And then I keep on asking that question. Like, usually they say something, oh, we're going to use this library or that library. Why? Because it's going to make this easier. Okay, cool. How much time does that save you? You start to ask them to, because basically what I'm trying to get them to is to go away, because usually these sorts of situations happen when people are emotional. They've seen a tech talk, got inspired by an article or a new cool pattern or something like that, and all I ever try to do is, I'm never saying to them, no, we're not going to do that or anything like that, unless it's something like really, really extreme. I usually just ask them to like sort of clarify to me, where is the benefit? Like, what's going to help us? How are we going to be better off and like helps to deliver on our goals? And that's the thing that I was saying, like that's the business part of me talking. Like in that conversation, I basically, the red thread I have through my questioning of whatever they want to do is, what benefits, concrete things are we going to get that makes the software, like the products that we are delivering, like, are we going to be able to ship faster? Are our customers going to be happier or something? Like, you should take the business side in this sort of situation, because you know that if you're not that person, it's very common that software engineers, they get so excited about the engineering part, and if you are part of that group and you're not the counterbalance or the devil's advocate, it very quickly becomes the problem. So basically what I do is I consciously take that choice. Even if I think it's a great idea or something, I really try to ask them, but isn't there a cheaper way? Isn't there a simpler way we could do it? Like, if they want to switch up like a tooling suite for some arbitrary thing, I immediately try to think about a cheaper, more less interesting way to solve the same problem, to sort of throw a few ideas out there to see, is there something even smaller we can do, and so forth. So because I want to get them out of the mindset that, oh, we're just so excited, like that emotional state where they're excited about the tool or so forth, and start having them think about what's good for the company, what's good for our customers, rather than just what would you think would be really cool to do right now. So what I want you to take away from this is that being the voice of reason or so forth as a tech lead is pretty much down to, first and foremost, you need to understand what your goals are and actually care about them. You need to understand that you, as a tech lead, you both have the responsibility of making sure that your software developers are happy and that they have everything they need, but you also have to make sure that you're honest about your performances and so forth, because you can't just be everybody's buddy. You have to make sure that the goals are being met, and who you are as an individual will affect this a little bit, but I usually say make sure that you develop a business mindset, and that's my way of doing it. I just try to think in terms of, I know that I need these tools, these pipelines, these things, because these are the bare bone basic. Without those, we're going to suffer on quality and delivery speed and stuff like that. But anything above that is a nice to have, like the core stuff that I absolutely support all my developers in that they want. But in some cases, they want to do things a little bit more advanced or things like that may not be necessary. And in those situations, I try to be the voice of reason, where I say, okay, is there an easier way for us to do it? Like a classic one is that someone wants to build like a custom tool or something like that to do something we do once every month. And I ask, okay, so how long do you think it's going to take to build that tool? It's going to take this amount of days. Okay, cool. If we do this manually right now, like if we just have like a reminder to make sure that we remind ourselves to do it, or whatever, like how long would it take until we get that time back? Oh yeah, it just takes 2 seconds. Yeah, okay, so if it only takes 2 seconds and we do it once a month, or like every so often, then maybe we don't have to build a whole tool for it. Maybe we can just have a little channel reminder to just do it, and we do it manually, because it's just a lot of investment. That, in those sorts of terms, I try to put things to sort of counter the excitement about the engineering aspect and try to balance it with the business value side of the thing. Reverse is when we have software developers who don't really care about anything, like or so forth and so forth. In those sort of situations, I don't try to reason with them. I try to make sure that they have understood what they're supposed to do, and like that they actually have the information necessary. And it's the same thing when I talk with stakeholders. If a stakeholder says, we're going to build A, B, and C, and it's going to be amazing, and I go, okay, cool, could you answer me like this? How's that going to work? How's this going to work? And you start asking a few clarification questions related to the topic, and then you see how deep you can go with the individual. Because if you do that long enough, that's what I usually argue to people, like really good seniors, they're really good at asking questions that clarify certain things about the specification. What then happens is you figure out very quickly if the person you're talking to has understood, like they really know what's going on and they are ready and willing and like all that stuff to make these things happen. Or if they were surfing on their phone, or they just have this sort of loose idea and they don't really know any details about anything. In those sorts of situations, usually you need to do more clarifications and all these other things that needs to happen. But it's hard for you to get there if nobody's asking any questions. So as a tech lead, it's really good for you to know when you're dealing with engineers who are usually a little bit quiet, or like they, so forth and so forth, and maybe either they don't feel comfortable asking things, or they might be not paying attention. Doesn't really matter. Know your people well enough to know what you need to do in order to make sure that they have the information they need and the tools they need to deliver on those business goals, and then keep them honest when they get a little bit too excited. Have a great day.